Hi, and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be covering all the different angle-based prevention methods that exist in Armswinger. We'll look at prevent climbing, prevent falling, prevent wall walking, how instant height changes work, and we'll talk about the check cache to kind of give you a full idea of how all these different methods work, what you can change about them, and how they might need to be applied to your scene in particular. So the first thing you need to understand about these angle-based prevention methods is that they use a check caching system. So what I mean by that is the first time that Armswinger detects that you're, say, going up a slope that's too steep, you don't get an immediate rewind from that. Instead, what happens is that the check cache stores that reason in its cache and will only actually issue a rewind if several reasons in a row agree. The reason that happens is so that you don't have situations where players say try and scale a pebble, try and scale a small rock or some uneven ground and get rewound for that. That's frustrating for the player and certainly frustrating for you as a designer. So instead we use this cache system that says that a certain number of checks in a row all have to agree on a reason in order for a rewind to occur. So I can show you real quick in this demo that actually if I slowly move up this slope, which is too steep for me to climb, I'm not rewound immediately. I actually get rewound when I've gone up several inches up that hill, and that's because of the settings that we have set in Inspector. Same thing for falling, the exact same process works. The only one that's different is wall walking, but let's hold off for a minute. We'll talk about that when we get to it. So let's take a look at the easy settings first. You can turn prevent climbing on and off, prevent falling on and off, and prevent wall walking on and off. Totally selectable. If you don't want a particular prevention feature, you can absolutely disable it. There are also two angles set here which help determine whether the player is climbing or falling in a way that is too steep and that you want to consider an out of bounds event. And that's max angle player can climb and max angle player can fall. In your situation, you may want to set these to the same thing, or you can certainly make them different based on however you want to set your game up. Before we look at the instant height changes, though, let's take a look at the checks settings here. So this affects the check cache, and there are two different check caches. There's one for climbing and falling, and there's one for wall walking. The reason being is that wall walking can be a little more, it's a little less intuitive to the player, right? So if I go up and down a slope and I get rewound for that, it's pretty clear exactly what I did. But a wall walk's a little different. And the way a wall walk is being measured is as I'm moving across this slope here that's too steep for me to climb, my position is getting checked, but I'm also shooting a ray not only straight down from my headset, but I'm also shooting a ray just to the left of my headset. And that's not left based on which way the headset's turned. That's left based on the direction of travel of the headset. So in that way, we actually measure the point directly under the headset and the point just very slightly to the left to give us the angle of the slope that you're walking across. So if you're walking across a slope that's too steep, you can get rewound for that too. So how do we determine what's too steep? With wall walking, what we do is if you're going along a surface and you're climbing slowly upwards, we use the prevent climbing max angle player can climb. The other way, if you're doing some wall walking and you're coming down a slope, we use max angle player can fall. So you might think to yourself, this is pretty easy to game. All you would have to do is wall walk for a little bit climbing, and then go slightly downwards in order to put in like a descending check. We've actually counted for that. So normally with the climb fall prevention, all the checks in the cache have to agree. With wall walking, it works a little different. The amount that you put here, the checks num wall walk checks out of bounds before rewinding, this is actually how many checks need to match, but the cache is twice this size. So the cache in this case would actually be 30. So I store 30 decisions being made about wall walking. Either you're wall walking up, you're wall walking down, or you're not wall walking at all. If at any time 15 of those decisions agree, we rewind you for wall walk. So what that means is that if I'm slowly wall walking and then slowly going up the hill and then I put in a descending check by stepping downwards just slightly before I go up again, I will still get rewound. It still considers that wall walking. So this is a pretty robust system for wall walking. Now, I do recommend that you set the checks num wall walk checks out of bounds before rewind a bit higher than your climb fall checks, just because you can be doing some things that seem like they should be okay as a player, that actually get considered wall walking. And so I would give the player a little more leeway. What we're primarily trying to prevent here is wall walking to places that you don't want your player to get to, or using wall walking to scale a height that you shouldn't be able to scale. So it's okay to put a little more leeway in here, and that's why the default is 15 and not 5. Okay, so we've talked about how prevent climbing works, how prevent falling works, and how prevent wall walking works. The other thing that goes with that is the instant height changes. So when I say instant height change, what I mean is that if I go from, say, the top of a stair, and I do a measurement from the bottom of my headset, and then I step off that stair and do a measurement from the bottom of my headset, I have to make sure that we rewind for a situation where you've basically thrown yourself off a cliff. So if you remember with the climb fall checks, 5 checks in a row in this case, because the number num climb fall checks out of bounds before rewind is set to 5. 5 checks in a row have to agree. Well, if you step off a cliff, the 5 checks in a row don't agree. Instead, they say, I'm fine, I fell off a cliff, so falling. And then I'm fine. So in that 5, we only have 1 that says that you're falling. So if there wasn't any other feature here, you could totally fall off cliffs without having any rewind done. What we do instead is we actually reuse a raycast that's being shot for something else. The raycast that's being shot to adjust your play area height as you move over terrain. We basically compare those ray hit points. So wherever the rays hit the ground, we look at this ray hit and then the one from the previous frame, and we calculate the height difference between the two. If that height difference is ever larger than instant height max change, so how I have it set here is 0.2, that's considered an instant height change, and we immediately either rewind or push you back based on your settings. So in this way, we can still do our sampling. We can still allow you to scale small rocks and things like that using our sampling techniques and the cache. But the instant height doesn't use those caches. The instant height is immediate, and it looks at a frame-by-frame measurement of the terrain underneath you in order to determine if you have had an instant height change or not. So that prevents your players from walking off cliffs. It prevents them from scaling like walls that are at half height. So if you have a half height wall in front of you and you try and walk over it, what would happen naturally is that your play space would be adjusted to be on top of that wall because your headset is shooting down, and that's what the height is being adjusted for. We don't really want that to happen. So instead what happens is it triggers for height max change is too large, and it does your pushback or your rewind based on that information. So we also give you some additional customization as to how Armswinger responds when you have an instant change out of bounds event. So we have instant height climb prevention mode and instant height fall prevention mode. And what that says is whether to do a pushback or a rewind based on whether the player is instantly climbing or instantly falling. So that would be instantly climbing is climbing on top of a wall, instantly falling is falling off a cliff. So the difference between pushback and rewind, if you haven't seen it in a previous video, is that pushback almost feels like you're pushing the world away from you. So you'll see here, as I try and use my headset to go on top of this stair, the stair is 0.21 world units, and my max height is set to 0.2. You'll see that even though my head is moving in the demonstration, my viewport does not. And I know that's difficult to see from a 2D viewpoint as far as what is happening, but what's actually happening is we're moving the camera rig backwards to adjust for how much you're moving your head forward. So it almost feels like you're pushing the world away with your head, which, given that I can't put in a C# command that forces you to not physically make a move, is the best way that I've been able to find to deal with that, is to deal with the situation like that. So you can choose either pushback or just a traditional rewind where you have a fade out, fade back in, both for climbing and falling. By default, if you try an instant climb, we do a pushback. So if I try and go up onto that stair that's too high for me, I do a pushback. And by default, if you try and jump off a cliff, we do a rewind. So up to you how you want to configure those, but you do have that flexibility. So again, to recap, we have prevent climbing, prevent falling, and prevent wall walking. Climbing and falling have their own angle settings. Wall walking uses the climbing setting when wall walking up and the falling setting when wall walking down. The instant max height change has to do how far your player can go up or down in a single frame move. So going up on top of a mid-height wall or falling off of a cliff. Instant height climb prevention mode and instant height fall prevention mode has to do with how arm swinger reacts when one of those events occurs. And the checks, num climb fall checks out of bounds before rewind, and num wall walk checks out of bounds before rewind has to do with the cache size and how many reasons in a row have to agree in order to actually trigger a rewind event. Hopefully this gives you a better idea about how these settings work. This is one of the more complex parts of Arm Swinger, and so you may need to watch this video again to kind of make sure that you understand everything that's going on. Certainly, if you have questions, leave them in the comments. I will definitely be looking for them on this video in particular. Happy to answer any of those. So play around with these settings. Hope you can find something that works well for you, and I'll see you in the next video.